Hello everyone, my name is Lyudmyla. I represent Open Dialogue Foundation. It's a human rights organization. We lead Building True Change coalition of activists, human rights defenders who unfortunately deprive the right to have financial services. And this is why we use Bitcoin as a bank of last resort to defend human rights and deliver humanitarian aid. And we are pleased to cooperate with Bitcoiners who help us, like Nwosu, to educate regulators about the social good of Bitcoin. And today our discussion, it's actually about regulations are not solution and what risk, if any, proof of work can experience because of being banned by the EU and G7. And I have delighted guests with me. So first it's Nwosu, Sebastien Gouspillou, Bota Jardemalie, and Italian Senator Mauro Barba. I would like to start with Bota, because we actually, together with Bota, as a Building True Change coalition, conducted over 200 meetings during the last year in 15 plus member states parliaments in the EU, and also international platform where gathered members of parliaments and governments. And we were educating about actually abuses of anti-money laundering regulation and counter-terrorism regulation, which deprive us, activists from all over the world, the possibility to use traditional financial system. This is something what we already succeed in more or less regulators understanding this issue slowly but certainly. But there is unfortunately talks and unfortunately also documents, which I would like Bota to discuss, that while we have these achievements in the field of presenting abuses of anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism regulation, it seems there are little understanding about actually the role of proof of work for social goods and actually empowering societies. Can you explain what European Commission want to do and why it's completely different take of Bitcoin mining, why it's assumed to be the so-called global security threat in the mind of regulators? Bota, floor is yours.
Hi everyone, thank you, Luda.
Microphone.
Oh, thank you. Is it on?
Introduce a little bit yourself also.
Okay. My name is Bota Jardemalie. I'm originally from Kazakhstan. I'm a lawyer and a human rights defender. And right now I'm a political refugee. And I live in Belgium, Brussels. And as Lyudmyla already mentioned, in addition to the human rights work that I do on a daily basis, we actively involved in Bitcoin advocacy with the EU institutions and the member states in different platforms such as Council of Europe and Organization for the Security and Cooperation in Europe as well. And I don't know how many of you really look at these regulatory issues that from time to time appear, but probably some of you remember that in the spring of 2002, during the discussion of the markets in crypto assets regulation, MiCA, there was a very heated discussion on whether the proof of work should be banned. And at that time, by March of 2022, there was basically a political compromise that proof of work stays, but there should be developed an environmental rating system for crypto assets. And then everyone relaxed that in MiCA, Bitcoin survived, so everyone moved on. But the problem is with politics that perception is reality. And what it means that when politicians face some serious crisis, and right now the most serious crisis in Europe is the energy supply, so they basically trying to find solutions, and sometimes solutions are imaginary, I would say. And so they decided that they have one of the scapegoats for the EU failing energy policy, and this is Bitcoin mining again. So they started pushing for the mechanism, banning Bitcoin mining again, but now it's hidden in the energy plan of the European Commission on the digitalization of energy sector. So what the European Commission is trying to do? First, they want to have a mechanism in every member state that allows basically European Union to ban Bitcoin mining during, and don't laugh, the peak of demand for electricity. Which is like, really, this concept is so divorced from reality. Everyone understands that nothing's going to happen when there is a high demand, when there are high prices. But the problem with the politician is that if they ban something, then it's impossible to unban. And we see it as a general trend. When they make a mistake with regulations, the way how they correct, they never repeal those regulations. They create more regulations on top of that. So this is one serious issue. And the problem with that issue, that they want to basically address it not only at the EU level, but also globally. And right now, the EU positioning itself as a kind of leader in cryptocurrency regulations. And as Luda mentioned, we have to remember that EU is an important union for the G7 countries. And this G7 union is going basically determine the policies for the rest of the globe. And this is one issue. Another issue is that, again, the Commission, because the Commission has this Green Deal, the European Union has its kind of goals under the Paris Accord. So they're looking where they can, like basically mechanisms that they consider environmentally harmful. And again, they say that Bitcoin blockchain is an obsolete blockchain that's harmful for environment. And the problem that it's the language that we see everywhere. They basically say old Bitcoin blockchain, obsolete, outdated technology. And they always compare it to the Ethereum's as Ethereum's consensus mechanism. And it's very strange how all of a sudden in regulatory documents you see that Ethereum's superior technology, Ethereum's gold standard should be promoted through the blockchain associations around the EU and globally. This is a very, very biased language, which is like you rarely see in regulatory documents, but you have to pay attention to that. So these two issues, these two attacks, it's kind of strange to see at the times when we all seen KPMG's report. We've seen how Cambridge index was kind of renewed. We see that more and more investors have positive outlook on Bitcoin. And so we see that this basically, there is one reality and then there is reality with the regulators. So what we have to do, I believe, that we have to really marry those two realities. Yeah. And this is very important to reach the regulator.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Bota. And actually, my question now to Sebastien. Sebastien, have you tried, and what is your experience to reach EU regulators? What is your, outcome? Did you try at all to eliminate this negative narrative? Maybe some blockchain association helped you. What is your experience? Tell us. Can you take the microphone? Yeah.
Yes, I try. I try. I continue to try. I was in the Ministry of Finance 3 months ago, 2 times, talking
of
about
France.
In France. Yes, we have an association in France. I think defending the proof of work at the Commission, but I was never invited to discuss with the European authorities, and I think it's a pity because they don't have the. I'm not sure they are honest when they are against the proof of work. I think they are against Bitcoin. But if ever they are honest, they need to hurt the miners, and we need to explain them how the proof of work can only buy the surplus and equilibrate a network, as in Texas, for example. But I had never had the possibility to express this kind of idea.
Thank you, thank you. Obi, actually, you was the person who helped a lot as an activist to explain what is Bitcoin mining, what is at all, how it's regulated exchanges, and why activists deprive the right to have financial services. At the same time, you make difference explaining regulators what was Bitcoin mining, for social goods. Can you explain what are the most convincing arguments you can present?
Thank you. So it was really interesting. So I've had the opportunity I could say go along with these guys, but it's probably a better way to describe it as to follow them, because they're like this sort of force of nature knocking down doors in the EU and in various parliaments, and making people hear and understand the other side of Bitcoin. Now, the value of me being there was that I gave a very technical, on-the-ground view of what was happening. So it just added credibility. It wasn't just the people who I say just, but the people who are actually being affected by these regulations, but someone explaining why there are unintended consequences. And so that's why I do suggest that other people who are professionals in the Bitcoin space should also look at doing this as well and contributing some of their time. There were two specific points which I will say that I explained, which the end result were, depending on the organization, the party, and so on, blew people's minds. And I found the most interesting conversations weren't the people who already were aligned with us, but the people who started off with their hands crossed, their feet crossed, their legs crossed. You could see that they already had a series of assumptions. And by the end, you see the body language change. Their hands start to uncross and their minds start to expand. And I think those are the most powerful. So one was related to how financial institutions have an unintended effect of penalizing some of the people who need the services the most. And the second was the misunderstanding of Bitcoin as this tool that consumes energy and is bad for the environment. And actually, it's, when properly deployed, is actually a tool to accelerate renewable adoption. So the first one, I would explain the fact that I have been in the Bitcoin space for quite a while. I launched the UK's first Bitcoin exchange in 2013, and it went on to be the longest running Bitcoin exchange, one of the longest running Bitcoin exchanges in the world. Ran for 8 years. And we had also one of the first fully regulated subsidiaries in mainland Europe as well. We did all these different things. We were the Bitcoin to GBP ticker on the New York Stock Exchange was from our company as well. At one point, we had 70% market share in the UK. So I have a lot of experience of running a financial institution and also running regulated financial institutions in strong Western economies. So that's useful because then they start listening. And I would say, rule number one, anybody who's a senior executive in a financial institution in a Western country cares about, they won't get there unless they really care about preventing money laundering, preventing terrorist financing, and preventing proliferation financing. They do care about that. But shock horror, they are human beings as well. And they care about human rights, humanitarian activities, and supporting human rights defenders, and people who they use their energy and efforts to support millions of people around the world. The problem is that existing regulations around anti-money laundering and terrorist financing and proliferation finances have a number of unintended consequences that end up due to de-risking, debanking some of these people. And there are four reasons, actually, why. One is something called, and I'll explain each one. I'll explain each one very briefly. One is called KYC and the risk-based approach around that. The next one is something called the travel rule that was put in place by an unelected international standards body or recommendation body called the Financial Action Task Force, FATF. And then the third is tipping off. And then finally is something called fitness and propriety. So the first is KYC. the KYC rules are knowing your customer, KYC. And the idea here is that you should understand who your customer is in order to be able to work out if they are potentially a money launderer or a terrorist financer. It makes sense to try and avoid these things. But around that, you have to then take what's called a risk-based approach, which is basically try to use your common sense to figure out, does this look suspicious? The problem with this is that authoritarian regimes and dictatorships can abuse this. And the way they do that is they will very easily launch some sort of story which is false about some person who's trying to raise awareness against them. And they might, for example, in Russian media or Belarusian media, put up a story in a small newspaper. And when you're onboarding thousands of customers a week, you have automated systems to look for unusual stories. So it'll pop up saying, there's a story in this Russian newspaper saying this person's a money launderer. Now, what are you going to do? Are you going to, as a financial institution, translate that document from multiple languages and then figure out if it's a correct story or not? Or are you going to take the view, as my primary school football teacher used to say, if in doubt, kick it out? That's what you're going to do. And so they know that this is asynchronous warfare. It's very cheap for them to do that. It's very expensive for financial institutions to counteract, so they can offboard their enemies and prevent them having access to the financial system. And this is all financial institutions, not just Bitcoin financial institutions, by the way. This is all. The second one is the travel rule. The travel rule also makes sense. What they're saying with this rule is that we should work together as financial institutions. If one of your customers sends value to another financial institution, for example, transfers to another bank, you should provide some of the KYC information, the customer information, to them so they can build a better view of their customer to help them manage the risk. It makes sense. But again, this can be used by authoritarian regimes and dictatorships. And this, again, blows people's mind. They don't realize this. They've never heard this. Now, and the way it can be used is that there is this fundamental assumption that all financial institutions are good actors. But if that financial institution is in an authoritarian regime or dictatorship, the reality is, and most people in the financial institution space, in the senior execs, know this is the case, that they are effectively arms of the regime. And so if you provide that information to them, within a very short period of time, sometimes minutes, it can be with the regime. And if the money is coming from an organization who's trying to raise awareness against that regime, those people could be debanked, questioned, arrested, sometimes tortured, sometimes even killed. So, again, this can be used offensively and aggressively by regimes. The third is tipping off. And tipping off is it's one of the most depressing as someone who runs a financial institution, but it also makes sense. What it says is that to prevent money launderers figuring out how to get around the regulation, if you do offboard someone, you should not explain why you offboard them, because otherwise they can open up multiple accounts and over time figure out how to game the system. So that, again, makes sense. The problem with this is if you are collateral damage, if you've been offboarded for the wrong reason, you cannot find out why you've been offboarded. And in fact, going back to the risk-based approach, it's often suggested that if someone asks questions, that's further evidence that they may be a money launderer. So it's this vicious circle. And then finally, you have the fitness and proprietary. Fitness means that you should know the regulations. You should be tested every 6 months on all regulation. Proprietary means that you should try to understand the unwritten regulations. What's not being written, you should figure out. And this is very subjective and vague. The problem with this is that it leads to a culture of fear. I'm fortunate enough to have sold my exchange after 8 years, done very well, and I decided to commit myself to supporting these brave women you see here and men and women around the world suggesting this. But many people who run a financial institution don't want to take that risk, because the punishment for getting this wrong is that it's not only a fine, but you are not able to perform the task of being a senior exec in a financial institution for the rest of your career. So it leads to, even though it's widely understood that this is what can happen, people are not willing to talk about it. I could talk about Bitcoin mining as well, but I don't
Yes,
think we have
actually,
time.
I think it's very important because we have here a panel on proof of work. So just explain how what was the reaction of regulators when you showed them video, what in reality doing
So
proof of work.
very briefly, I am also an early investor in a Bitcoin mining company based in East Africa. It's called Gridless, and we, by the name suggestion, we work with people who are literally have no access to the grid. So that means that they would use things like kerosene and paraffin to heat their houses or provide them heating and light. Now, what's really interesting about this is that there are, in these sort of rural environments, basically in the jungle, in the middle of nowhere, literally, incredible renewable energy resources. They have sunlight, but even more available is hydro. There are streams everywhere providing tons of free energy. So local entrepreneurs try to create these hydro boxes. These basically, they can take power from the streams. And it's run of river, which means it doesn't affect the environment at all. The water comes in, takes power, water goes out. They go to the banks, the local banks, and they say, look, we would like to get a loan to set up one of these microgrids. And the bank says no. And the reason they say no is that even though they want to help, again, financial institutions want to help, they have to take a risk-based approach, and they have no credit history on any of the energy producers' customers because they have no KYC, no information. So they can't provide them a loan. And this is where someone like a Gridless comes in. They effectively become an anchor tenant, a bit like in a supermarket or a shopping mall, where you have the supermarket or the cinema acts like an anchor tenant, covering half of the rental costs, so that lots of the smaller companies who don't have so much of a history, it's still a balanced risk, and the bank can give the loan. So they do this in the case of these villages. They will say, well, we'll cover half of the costs. And we're mining this product that's been effectively being mined successfully without fail for 1.5 decades. And we have the backing and credit history. So we can be your anchor tenant, we can take half of the energy you're producing, which is basically free energy, half of the energy you're producing, and pay you from it from the first minute. They go back to the bank, and they now have an anchor tenant. And the bank, it goes from uninvestable to investable. And the village goes from dirty, polluting, unhealthy, expensive kerosene and paraffin to clean, renewable, inexpensive electricity. And it's only because of Bitcoin. And then I show them a small video at the end normally, but
and everyone was shocked. I can confirm.
And that's the point where you see people's, especially people like certain parties who
Exactly.
literally devote themselves to saying Bitcoin mining is bad, but they tend to be interested in humanitarian regimes at the same time, or avoiding or improving these humanitarian things. You see their minds blow. And the conversation starts.
Exactly. Yes, and this is how actually we were advocating since last autumn, to change negative language in MiCA regulation about basically attempt to ban Bitcoin mining and proof of work. And these examples we need. So if anyone in the audience know these kind of examples, please reach us. This is what we need. And now I would like to give the floor to Senator Mauro del Barba, one of the best friends of human rights, representative of Italian Parliament and Organization for Security and Cooperation Parliament Assembly, which unites 57 member states. For many years, you actually helping us defend human rights. You was one of the first who raised the issue of abuse of anti-money laundering regulation and counterterrorism regulation against activists as a transnational tool of repression. You initiated also discussion in Italian Parliament how we use Bitcoin for social good. How much you know before meeting our Building True Change coalition of activists, and especially how much know your colleagues about environmental impact and social goods of Bitcoin for society?
Thank you, Luda. Thank you, everybody, for the kind invitation. Buongiorno a tutti. How much I knew? A little bit. I confess you that before meeting you a few months ago, I knew a little bit about cryptocurrency. I want to be clear. Before I became a member of parliament 11 years ago, I was a computer scientist. I studied blockchain and had tricked me for the technical implication, the social implication. And at that time, I studied a little bit Bitcoin, and I arrived to my personal conclusion. Probably now I say wrong conclusion, because I was worried about energy consumption, of course. I was worried about completely anonymous transaction. I was worried about the value of the Bitcoin not related to a real market situation, and I didn't understand how this situation could be useful to society. So I forget this this topic for a few years, and I really want to thank you, because you show me the relation about this topic and the topic that I care too much, as you know, human right and the right of activists on politics right. And I learned about in these weeks, and I changed a little bit my idea. I still have some doubt exactly on the topics I told you, but now I think we have to solve these doubts, because the risk is bigger. The risk for society, not only for activists, because we are looking for security with the anti-money laundering rules, of course, and you say it makes sense. Yes, makes sense, but don't run. Makes sense, but don't run. Don't run in some specific case, very important for your security, but for national security. So I would like to follow a rational path. Why nobody in parliament, probably in every parliament, even in the French one.
Especially in the French one.
Okay, why we that represent the interest of citizens don't know these topics? I reflected on this, probably for the resistance of national bank, of course, because they don't want to face off this topic. I don't think that they don't want to solve, but it's better to wait for them. It's not good for citizens. We have to face off this topic. But also, at least in Italy, for the level of public debate, nobody, except here, talk about this situation, even in the big newspapers. And so this situation is no good for our security. So let me go faster. Thank you, because you show me the correlation. The first time I experienced the role of Bitcoin in human rights was exactly with you. We had a video call, and you explain in very detailed way the situation. And I was very impressed listening Obi Nwosu, of course, like now. And since that moment, I'm thinking about which could be the solution, okay? And I talk with Italian authority, of course, and they completely under-evaluate the problem. Which is the problem? This kind of rule are written by techniques, and then parliaments should approve. And when we approve, we have read this by principle, but you can see detail, and in the detail there is the problem that you underlined before. How to solve this situation? We have to organize a sort of pressure, lobbying, but we have to talk with people. We have to spread information, okay? Of course, politically, it's clear that we face off a trade-off. Security on the left side, and privacy on the right side. So, if you haven't privacy, if you are not free to operate, you are not free in your fundamental right. Okay. So privacy, in my opinion, should become before. Okay. But we have to consider security, the security of a single citizen and the national security. And when we talk about national security, this is a purely political problem. Okay. There are a lot of interests that are facing this situation. We, politicians, must put the interest of a single citizen in the middle. But at the end, we have to consider also the national security. At national security, report you in the middle of the interest. That is the problem. But if we follow the interest of every single citizen, we can find the solution. And I think finally that we can't have at the same time an anti-money laundering that is so strong and so not flexible. And not use crypto values. Or we solve the anti-money laundering problem, and we will do, or we leave to use crypto values in a free way. So problem, the good situation, the best situation will be to find a light regulation, a light rule for using crypto values, leaving anonymous transaction, because we need anonymous transaction for freedom of people. Every government, every free and liberal government want people can operate anonymously, okay? Of course, on the other side, every free, democratic, liberal government must have instrument, tool to block illegal operation. In this trade-off, if we start to talk with people, start to talk with the member of parliament, for sure we will find the solution. But at the moment, I'm here for listen, for focusing better the problem, and to stand with you for a solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Mauro. And I would like to get back to Sebastien. Sebastien, could you tell us, if you have opportunity to speak to regulator, what will be 3 key aspects you would like to bring about actually why society benefits from Bitcoin mining?
I'm not sure to have 3 things to say. We are in a period where we can see the importance of the energy sector. And 3 years ago, it was not so clear for people. Now we know energy is very important, it's rare, and the Bitcoin mining can be very helpful. We can see it in many countries. Now we start to do mining in Finland, for example, in Europe. So in Finland, they just build a nuclear plant. Now they have too much electricity. It's a very small country with 5 million people. The mining is the only option to buy this excess of electricity, the only one. They can try to find data centers or aluminium makers, but it's long. and they have to promise a big volume of electricity on the long term. With the mining, it's not the case. If they have too much electricity for 3 years or 4 years, it's enough to create a farm, to have the profitability, and to stop the farm when they don't need us anymore. And it's the same everywhere. The mining can stop when the electrician, when the supplier of electricity has no interest to continue to give electricity with a very cheap price. They have to understand that the miners used to buy the electricity with a very cheap price. And as soon as they have another client, we have to disappear, because if we buy the electricity 4 cents and the guy with his data center is ready to buy 6 cents, we are disqualified. So it's just a tool for an electrician in view to equilibrate the supply and the demand. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Obi, what effect, if any, would potential upcoming EU regulation labeling Bitcoin as a threat to energy security and environment globally for actually Bitcoin developers or company, if any?
So, yeah, this is the proposed regulation from the EU. If it were to occur, it won't affect the Bitcoin ecosystem globally as a whole, but it will have, in the long run, only negative effects for 2 things. One, for the competitiveness of the EU in this clearly growing and exciting space. But the other is for the actual energy transition objectives of the EU. It will be the equivalent of shooting yourself in the foot, as was just mentioned now. If using Bitcoin as the energy buyer of last resort, it's able to buy energy when no one else wants to buy that energy. And it's the only thing, 15 years ago, this didn't exist. It's the only thing on this planet that can buy energy when no one else is willing to buy it. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and start paying you for it within the first minute of it being turned on. And what this allows you to do is earn money from your renewable energy sources earlier. And that money can be reinvested into accelerating the adoption of renewable energy sources. Otherwise, you're leaving investment on the table. So that's the effect of, it will be a local effect to the EU, but that's the effect of not having this thing that wants to pay for your energy when no one else wants to pay for it, paying for it. But the other effect that you will have is we have some of the best minds in the Bitcoin space in the EU right now, developers and engineers and companies. And there are great engineers across the world. It's a global space and it's expanding. And there's some parts of the world that are welcoming to this. But if there is regulation around energy, it will have a chilling effect for the entire space. And those people who will build the Googles and the Apples of the future will not build them in the EU. They will build them somewhere else, and that wealth will go to somewhere else.
Thank you. I would like to open the floor, actually, to give the questions for our senator and our human rights defenders and miners, so you also participate in this discussion. And then, yeah, please introduce yourself and question. Yeah.
Hi. I'm Jonathan, a lawyer who's been practicing in Bitcoin and crypto for 10 years. Let me start off by tackling the topic of AML. AML is a sham, as in like we can't measure how much money laundering has been curbed through AML. And I'm saying this as someone who has advised the EBA on the TFR, Transfer of Funds Regulation, and I wrote a doctorate thesis on Bitcoin and money laundering in 2015. So I think I have a bit of a valuable opinion to provide on that. Secondly, the topic, proof of work. MiCA has been implemented. It's now entered into force and it's becoming applicable next year in 2 stages. I want to make an appeal. The MiCA itself, the regulation, is the primary legislation level, right? Now there's a secondary level, which are the regulatory technical standards. There's been the second package of RTSs issued earlier this month, and there's a very serious threat to proof of work
Yes.
in the second package of RTSs, because they're proposing to measure the energy values levels
Yes.
of a network by analyzing the DLT network nodes, not the miners, the nodes, which are defined as having either a partial or complete copy of the ledger. And they analyze the location, the devices they're using, and the third factor being the energy consumption that such devices are using, which is madness. Because that opens the network, Bitcoin, to a massive attack vector being, simply put, placing nodes anywhere on the planet where the location somehow gives a very bad rating to the network, and all of a sudden there's an open attack vector for anyone to attack Bitcoin legislatively. So the appeal is that, again, rather than saying, well, the politicians are saying this, saying that, this is public consultation. So if you go through the RTSs, it's 300 pages, so just focus perhaps on the part relating to the RTSs for energy consumption and make your voices heard.
Exactly.
Because if we don't do that, then we can't then next year say, oh, the politicians have implemented this, what are we going to do about it? So this is a chance for everyone to speak up and say, listen, what you're proposing is stupid, please reconsider for reasons A, B, C, and then we can say, okay, we tried our very best to try and make them see reason, but otherwise, I mean, again, now's the chance.
Yeah.
Because the way I'm seeing it is that there's regulatory capture happening at a massive scale, and we're going to sit back and do nothing about it. I mean...
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your very valuable comment. And you know what we see that we all, like most of us came into Bitcoin because of its decentralized nature, and we see how it works against Bitcoin. It's really we have to go through one conference to another conference and explain to people the dangers that are upcoming, and you guys have to take this issue seriously. And whether you are on Twitter, whether you are, you know, some of you have podcasts, maybe you can give interviews, you have to work on these issues and the problem with money laundering regulation, anti-money laundering regulations, then kind of this threat to potential harm of Bitcoin for environment, and of course this excessive energy use. This is very important, and your contribution will be absolutely necessary.
Yeah. Mauro, yes, please. Yes.
Thank you. I only would like to comment what you say. The AMML is a shame because I understand why you said, but I would like to invite you, every one of you, to consider even cultural reason because we are now at this point. For instance, in Italy, AMML is stronger than in the other part of EU. Why? Because we had the mafia, because we had a lot of illegal companies. So people wanted this kind of rule for having a free market, for having freedom. Because if you have a lot of illegality, you ask to your government to protect you. So we have to face off with this cultural situation. Nobody in Italy realized that this AML situation is a shame because they need to be protected by illegality. So if we only say it's a shame, nobody will understand. Nobody.
Yes, we need to explain.
We have to work together in a cultural difference and to find a solution.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please introduce yourself. Yeah.
Thank you, Mauro. Sebastien Becker. I'm part of the board of directors of INATBA, which is International Association of Trusted Blockchain Applications, co-founded by the European Commission 5 years ago. I just want to invite everybody to join your national blockchain associations, because we do a lot of work to prepare the worst in regulation. We took basically the threat of proof of work ban out of MiCA. And I can only second what Mauro said. Our politicians are not bad-willed. They just don't have the time or the knowledge to understand the complicated details. And we have bodies in our industry that talk to, politicians in Rome, in Berlin, in Brussels. But our industry has a tendency to just focus on Lambo and to the moon, and not to join these, bodies that are there. So we should also unite, let's say, the efforts of our, let's say, different hot topics, because the contexts are there. We are well networked in Brussels and elsewhere, and politicians are listening to us. Unfortunately, the left side of the spectrum is, in some countries, totally anti-crypto because of stupid reasons. So yes, it requires a lot of discussion, and it's of course very important to add the human rights level to it, or to strengthen it. But please, as an industry, come together and organize yourselves.
Yeah. Thank you. More questions? Yeah, in the room.
Yeah, I find the argument about AML and...
Can you please introduce yourself so we know?
Yeah, I'm an attendee, anonymous attendee.
Okay.
I find the argument about the AML a little bit laughable, to be honest with you, because the argument about the mafia in Italy, obviously it's been so effective that there's no mafia anymore in Italy, right? It's been so effective that Deutsche Bank is not laundering any money, right? Never been caught laundering any money. HSBC either, never been caught laundering any money. Yeah, it's amazing. And what's the currency that's most commonly used for criminal activity? USD cash, right? Bags of cash, even used by the feds, etc. So I guess my comment to this is, it's really laughable arguments. It's only about controlling the people, spying on very small transactions. When someone wants to buy a freaking bicycle worth 2,000 euros, now they have to tell their banks what it's for, even if they earn their money legitimately. So it's unacceptable. And I think, anyway, I don't think it's a lost cause for regulators, because look at what happened. I'm using this analogy, however relevant you will find it. But in the US, they've waged a war on drugs for decades. They spent billions on war on drugs. And what they are doing now, they're legalizing weed, just because they realize that there's more money to be made than to fight this. And their war on drug, during the whole war on drug, and even now, really harmful drugs like fentanyl. There is a big problem in Canada and across the US about fentanyl. Nothing happens, right? People keep dying of this, and my opinion is there's going to be a lot more demand for sound money than for these harmful drugs. So, good luck with that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Unfortunately for Mauro, I have to agree with you. Thank you for your comment. But this is, we personally experience how AML works, because Luda, me, we discovered Bitcoin when we were de-risked from the banking system, as many political activists and human rights defenders. And we see that it's a growing trend in general, that with the regulations that leads to financial exclusion. But the problem is that when we come to politicians, they really don't know anything about it. When we first time came with this issue to one very important person from the Economic Committee at the European Parliament, he called us externalities.
And market failure.
In market failure. And basically everything works fine, but this is just a market failure. We said, no, let's remember what is market failures. Market failures, the market was perfectly fine until you started regulating it. It's the result of your regulation, so you have to fix your regulations. And this is a thing that there are more and more industries suffering from the increased cost of compliance. And this is when you have to put pressure on your politicians. And especially right now, we are facing elections in the summer of this year in June.
In June, European Parliament.
In June.
Yeah.
So this is something that a lot of people don't pay attention to this election. But it's extremely important that you know who's going to run in your country. And you maybe have a group on Twitter, which Twitter is very effective, surprisingly, right?
For politicians
the
specifically,
EU political bubble. So start talking with them on this issue, reach them. Raise the issue of AML failures, because there are very few people that talk about it.
Yeah. Yes, of course. Of course.
Sorry. So, thank you for your comment. But I think we have a big problem comparing democracy and autocracy. And autocracy, in this point of view, are stronger. So, what I want to say, how democracy run. If you are lucky, your politician will be a little bit better than the medium of people, if you are lucky, okay? So you can pretend that your politician, you don't choose your politician to Oxford University. You choose them by election, of course, first of all. But even if they were Einstein and the best man in the world, they couldn't do what you require without the help of people.
Yes.
If we don't use our intelligence, our clever, to explain people why AML is not so good for their interest, it's completely unuseful to take this interesting speech. I agree, of course, but at the end, if we really want to change something in a democracy, we must have consensus, okay? And we must operate for this. There is no short way. There is no short way. So, there is one politician that I studied only 4 days. I studied only 4 days to come here, and 4 nights. Now I can say I'm an expert. Okay.
In political field, yeah.
You need just a few time, okay? But we have to investigate how to do this. Okay.
Yes.
So thank
More
you.
questions,
Thank
please.
You.
Yeah. Just
Yeah. I think that the key question for me, at least, is how to convince EU and G7 not to ban proof of work. And I don't think that going to the AML discussion is the best way, best strategy, if we have to pick one. It's a trap, because it's a never-ending discussion. Maybe it's to try to convince EU and G7 what is the added value, the value proposition of proof of work, and to fix a problem. What is the problem that we can fix, if we have to pick one? Maybe it's to how many % of the electricity produced is not consumed? Do you know? If yes, convince that this is a way to fix it. So I would love to hear what you think about that. How many %? And is it a real problem that EU and G7 have to fix? And if yes, Sebastien or all the miners can convince them that this is probably the best way to convince them not to go to the AML trap.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
I just can say electricity is not so simple. You don't produce electricity that you don't consume. If you produce, you consume. So we are in capacity to produce a lot of more. To make a draw, something easy to understand, we have a tool, a worldwide tool, to produce energy in capacity to produce 300, for example. And the total people in the world consume 100. We have the capacity to produce 3 times more. And more you want renewable energy, more you need to increase your capacity of production for the peaks. You know, so if you want to have 100% renewable, you absolutely need mining. It's a better way to pay these big tools, only build in view to respond to the peaks. It's my view.
Thank you.
I just quick comment.
But please, because
very quick. Yes, I understand your frustration, but you have to remember that there are 3 key lines of attack on Bitcoin. one is AML, because it's the general narrative, it's used by money launderers and terrorists, right? So here we come and explain how we use as end users, right? Then the second issue is, of course, energy consumption, and the third issue is environmental impact. So unfortunately, we cannot disregard and choose which one is more important. All three factors are very important, and we as a community have to address each of them.
Yeah, thank you. Last question, please, before we end our discussion. We can take maybe this microphone. Oh, okay.
So yeah, very, very quickly. I would like to ask you, what do you think the actual incentives and motivations would be for the EU to actually allow this ecosystem to continue existing? And my question stems from the fact that the EU is entering a very, very difficult period of not only a demographic crisis, economic crisis, and a credibility crisis, especially in terms of the whole political system. This is not only in Italy, France, or Germany, it's everywhere. And so what Bitcoin in particular proposes is an alternative that actually threatens what they actually have to do, right? Because in order for them to keep the boat afloat, they actually need to tighten the screws, not let them loose on. So if that is their plan, that they want to keep the train rolling, why would they actually allow any of this to thrive?
My look on that it's a general difference between a democracy and authoritarian regime. Of course, there are a lot of things that are more efficient in authoritarian state, because the decision can be done very quickly, there are, resources can be sent, etc., etc. But the end result is going to be very bad for the population. And so in democracy, at least we have some instruments to
influence.
At least try to influence and change the rule of the game. And we really should take them seriously, because this is a growing kind of attitude that politics is dirty, politics is elsewhere, I should not have any influence, and I don't care. But this is extremely dangerous. We saw what can happen, how quickly democracy can turn into authoritarian state during the COVID, and this can happen at any moment if we keep being quiet and don't engage.
The answer to your question, there's many parts to it, but when we look in terms of any group, any organization, whether it's a country or a company, there's this sort of ideal point, sometimes called a Nash equilibrium, but basically it's the ideal point that you need to go for. Nothing at extreme works. So when running an organization, a country or a union, you do not want to have completely iron grip control, because people will then leave if you go too far. And if you're too laissez-faire, then things collapse. So you need to have a balance. And so that's the first thing. If they choose to go too far, then you become an authoritarian dictatorship, and people will leave and rebel. So that's the first point. It isn't that the solution is to go more and more control. The solution is to always stay at the right equilibrium point. And the second point is that as a forward-thinking union, you should not look where the ball is. I'm going to again to use my primary school teacher's football analogies. You should not look where the ball is, but where the ball is going. And if you can see what other countries are doing, if you can see whether they're the United States to other faster, more progressive countries, they are embracing more and more Bitcoin. They're embracing Bitcoin mining, and they're gaining the benefits from this. And if you just look and extrapolate, you will see that in a few years' time, it will be clear that that was the right way to go.
Thank you, Obi. And Mauro, do you want something to say? Or we?
No.
Okay. So I'm really grateful for everyone to active participation. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out during these days, and we're happy to stay in touch with you. Thank you so much for participation.
Thank you.